She stood a full head taller than any man who had ever asked for her hand, and every single one of them had walked away. They called her a curiosity, a mistake of nature, too much woman for any reasonable life. But what none of them saw, what they were too afraid to recognize, was that Alara Folkman possessed something far more dangerous than unusual height. She had learned to carry weight that would break most men's backs, to work through pain that would send others to their knees, to survive alone in a world that had decided she did not belong anywhere. And when a lone Apache warrior arrived at the property that morning, bloodied and exhausted, he would see immediately what her own people had spent years refusing to acknowledge. Alara had been hauling fence posts since dawn. The wood was green and heavy, each piece requiring both hands and most of her considerable strength to maneuver into position. Sweat darkened the back of her plain cotton dress despite the cool morning air. Her hands, rough and calloused from years of this kind of work, gripped the timber without hesitation. She had learned long ago not to complain about splinters. The homestead sat 3 miles from the nearest town, far enough that most people forgot it existed. Vernon Cade owned the property but rarely visited, preferring to let Alara manage the daily labor in exchange for a place to stay and enough money to survive. It was an arrangement that suited them both. He did not have to look at her or explain her presence to curious neighbors, and she did not have to endure the stares and whispers that followed her everywhere else. She was 26 years old and had not spoken to another woman in almost 2 years. The fence line stretched across the southern boundary of the property, separating Cade's land from the open territory beyond. Alara worked methodically, setting each post deep enough to withstand the wind that swept across these plains with nothing to slow it down. Her arms burned from the effort, but she welcomed the pain. It gave her something to focus on besides the emptiness. She had been 12 when her mother died, 14 when her father remarried, and his new wife made it clear there was no place for a daughter who kept growing past what was natural. By 16, Alara was taller than her father. By 18, she was taller than every man in their settlement. The marriage proposals that came were either cruel jokes or desperate offers from men too old or too broken to attract anyone else. She had accepted none of them. The sound of hoofbeats made her straighten, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Riders rarely came this far out unless they were lost or looking for something specific. She scanned the horizon and spotted a single horse approaching from the east, moving fast but unsteady. As it drew closer, she could see the rider slumped forward, barely holding the reins. Alara dropped the post she was holding and started walking toward the house. Her long stride covered ground quickly, years of isolation having taught her to move with purpose when something felt wrong. The horse slowed as it reached the property line, its sides heaving with exhaustion. The rider wore traditional Apache clothing, the leather and beadwork unmistakable even from a distance. He slid from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped, hitting the ground hard and staying down. Alara broke into a run, her boots kicking up dust as she closed the distance. When she reached him, she dropped to one knee and carefully turned him onto his back. Blood soaked through his shirt along his left side, dark and fresh. His eyes opened, dark and unfocused, and locked onto her face. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his gaze traveled upward, taking in her full height, even as she knelt beside him. And something shifted in his expression. Not fear or disgust or the careful politeness she was used to seeing. Something else entirely. Recognition. His hand moved to the wound at his side, pressing against it weakly, and he spoke a single word in a language she did not understand. Then his eyes closed and his breathing became shallow and rapid. Alara looked toward the house, calculating the distance and the effort it would take to move him. Then back at the wound that was bleeding faster than she liked. She made her decision in less than 3 seconds, scooping him up with both arms and rising to her full height in one smooth motion. He was not a small man, but she carried him as easily as she had carried those fence posts. His head rolled against her shoulder as she walked, his breath hot against her neck. Behind her, his horse followed without being led. Ahead, the door to the house opened, and Vernon Cade stepped onto the porch, his expression already hardening as he took in the scene. Alara kept walking, her jaw set, knowing exactly what he was about to say, and knowing just as clearly that she was going to ignore him. Some decisions were too important to wait for permission, and something about the way that Apache warrior had looked at her, even bleeding and half-conscious, told her this was going to change everything. Vernon Cade did not move from the porch as Alara climbed the steps with Neshoba in her arms. His face had gone tight with the kind of anger that came from fear poorly disguised. He opened his mouth to speak, but Alara pushed past him through the doorway before he could form the words. The interior of the house was dim and cool, and she moved directly to the table in the center of the main room, laying Neshoba down with more care than she had shown the fence posts. "You cannot keep him here," Vernon said from the doorway. His voice was low and controlled, which somehow made it worse than if he had shouted. "You know what happens when they find Apache on private land. You know what they will assume." Alara ignored him, already moving to the wash basin to wet a cloth. The blood had soaked through to her dress, dark stains across her chest and arms that would take hours to scrub out. She did not care. When she returned to the table, she began cutting away the damaged shirt with her sewing scissors, revealing the wound beneath. It was a deep gash along his ribs, the kind made by a blade rather than a bullet. The edges were clean, but the bleeding had not stopped. "Are you listening to me?" Vernon took 2 steps into the room. "That warrior has enemies, men who will come looking for him, and when they find him here, they will not care that you were only trying to help. They will burn this house and everything in it. Then leave," Alara said without looking up. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound with the damp cloth. She had tended injured animals before, horses and cattle that had tangled with barbed wire or gotten kicked. The principle was the same. Stop the bleeding, keep it clean, give the body time to heal itself. Vernon made a sound of frustration deep in his throat. "You have been alone too long. It has made you forget how to think properly. That man is dangerous. He is bleeding." Alara pressed the cloth firmly against the wound. "Everything else can wait." She heard Vernon move behind her, pacing in that agitated way he had when things did not go according to his plans. The floorboards creaked under his boots. Outside, Neshoba's horse whinnied, thirsty and exhausted from whatever journey had brought them both here. "I am going to town," Vernon said finally. "Someone needs to report this. If the territorial marshal hears about it from someone else, it will be worse for all of us." Alara's hands stilled for just a moment. "He will die if you bring the marshal back here tonight. Better him than us." The door slammed before she could respond, and then she heard Vernon's horse being saddled, heard him ride out at a pace that meant he was serious about his threat. She had perhaps 3 hours before he returned, maybe 4 if the marshal was dealing with other business. Not nearly enough time for Neshoba to heal enough to travel. She looked down at the man on her table. His breathing had steadied slightly, though his face was still pale beneath the brown of his skin. There were scars on his chest and arms, old wounds that had healed badly without proper care. His hands were calloused like hers, the kind that came from years of hard work. One of his fingers had been broken at some point and had set crooked. Alara returned to cleaning the wound. She worked in silence, her movements gentle despite the size and strength of her hands. When she was satisfied that she had done what she could, she retrieved needle and thread from her sewing basket. The stitching was careful and tight, each pull of the thread deliberate. She had mended enough torn fabric to know how to make something hold. As she tied off the final stitch, Neshoba's eyes opened. They were dark and clear, and they fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. He did not flinch or try to sit up. He simply watched her, taking in every detail of her face as if memorizing it. Then his gaze moved to her hands, still holding the needle and thread, to her arms, strong and steady, to her shoulders broad enough to carry weight most women would never attempt, and back to her eyes. When he spoke, his voice was rough but certain. "You are the one." Alara set down the needle and thread with hands that had gone suddenly unsteady. "Why did you say that? You are the one." Neshoba's eyes did not leave her face. He tried to sit up, winced at the pull of fresh stitches, and settled back against the table with a sharp exhale. When he spoke again, his accent was thick but his meaning clear. "I have been looking for someone with real strength, not just muscle but character. Someone who acts without hesitation when others are in need. You do not know me." Alara took a step back, putting distance between them. Her pulse had quickened in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with being seen, really seen, for the first time in years. "I know what I saw." He raised one hand slowly, gesturing toward the door. "That man who left. He keeps you here because you work harder than any hired hand he could find, but he hides you away like something shameful. I saw that immediately." The accuracy of it struck her like a physical blow. She turned away, busying herself with cleaning the blood from her hands. The water in the basin turned pink, then red. "He gives me work and shelter. That is enough." "No." The single word carried absolute certainty. It is not enough. You stay here because you believe you have no other choice. But you are wrong. Alara gripped the edge of the wash basin hard enough that her knuckles went white. You do not know anything about me. You do not know what I have lived through. I know you carried me like I weighed nothing. I know you did not hesitate when you saw I was hurt, even though helping me puts you in danger. I know your hands are steady when they work, and your eyes carry the weight of years spent apologizing for existing. He paused, gathering strength. And I know that among my people, women like you are valued. Women who can work alongside men, who can defend themselves and their families. Women with strength are not hidden away in shame. They are respected members of the community. She turned back to face him, something sharp and painful unfolding in her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand that your world is not the only world, and because I need your help. The honesty of it caught her off guard. She had expected gratitude, perhaps, or empty promises, not this direct request that treated her as an equal capable of making choices. What kind of help? The wound. He touched his side carefully. 3 men attacked our hunting camp 2 days north of here. They killed my brother and took our horses. I tracked them this far before they caught me at the river crossing. I hurt the leader badly before I got away, but they will come looking to finish what they started. Ilara felt her stomach drop. How soon? Tomorrow. Maybe tonight if they ride through darkness. His jaw tightened. I need to be gone before they arrive. If they find me here, they will assume you helped me. They will hurt you to get information. I can defend myself, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew how foolish they sounded. 3 armed men against a woman with no weapon and no training, no matter how strong she was. Neshoba studied her for a long moment. Can you ride? Yes. Can you shoot? I have never tried. He closed his eyes briefly, thinking. When he opened them again, there was a new determination in his expression. Then I will teach you what I can in the time we have. But first, I need food and water, and you need to decide if you are willing to take a risk. What kind of risk? The kind that changes everything. He pushed himself up on his elbows despite the obvious pain it caused. That man who left will bring back people who want me dead or captured. If you help me escape, you will not be able to stay here anymore. They will know you chose to help an Apache instead of turning him in. Your life here, such as it is, will be over. Alara looked around the small house that had been her prison and her refuge for the past 2 years. At the simple furniture, the sparse belongings, the windows that looked out on endless emptiness. She thought about Vernon returning with the marshal, about explaining why she had defied direct orders, about watching them drag Neshoba away in chains or worse. She thought about the way Neshoba had looked at her, not with pity or disgust or careful politeness, with acknowledgement of what she was capable of doing. Tell me what you need, she said. Ilara brought him water first, then bread and dried meat from the small pantry. Neshoba ate slowly, his movements careful around the fresh stitches. While he recovered his strength, she gathered supplies. 2 canteens, a canvas bag with food that would not spoil. The money Vernon kept hidden in a tin beneath the floorboards, enough to get her through a few weeks if she was careful. She took it without guilt. He owed her far more than this for 2 years of labor. You move with purpose, Neshoba observed, watching her work. Like someone who has made difficult decisions before. I have had practice. Ilara rolled a blanket tight and secured it with leather straps. My father taught me to always have a bag ready in case we needed to leave quickly. He said people who wait until disaster arrives never survive it. He was a wise man. He was a cautious man. There is a difference. She paused, considering her next words. He also taught me that being different means always being ready to defend yourself, because no one else will do it for you. Neshoba nodded slowly. Among my people, we have a saying. The wolf that hunts alone must be twice as strong and 3 times as smart. You have been that wolf for a long time. Something about the comparison steadied her. She had never thought of her isolation as strength before, only as punishment. But perhaps there was truth in what he said. She had survived. She had learned. She had become capable in ways that softer women never needed to be. Show me how to shoot, she said. He rose from the table with visible effort, one hand pressed against his wounded side. Not yet. First you learn to move. A weapon is useless if you cannot position yourself correctly. He gestured toward the open space in the center of the room. Come here. Ilara approached slowly, uncertain what he intended. Neshoba circled her once, studying her frame with the same attention she had seen horses evaluated before purchase. But there was no judgment in his eyes, only assessment. "You are strong," he said. "Stronger than most men I have known. But you carry yourself like someone ashamed of that strength. Your shoulders curve inward. Your head bows. You try to make yourself smaller." He reached out and touched her shoulder blade gently. "Stand straight. Let your spine remember what it was built to do." She straightened slowly, feeling muscles protest against years of habitual slouching. The change in perspective was immediate and startling. From this height she could see the top of Neshoba's head, could look down at him the way men had always looked down at her. "There." His voice held satisfaction. "Now you see the world as you were meant to see it. Not from below, but from your true place." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. No one had ever told her to stand taller before. Every interaction of her life had involved the opposite instruction. Make yourself smaller. Take up less space. Do not draw attention. When those men come, Neshoba continued, they will expect you to cower, to beg, to be weak because you are a woman alone. That expectation is your greatest weapon. They will not see the danger until it is too late. What danger? Her voice came out rougher than intended. I have no training for fighting. I would not know where to start. You have been training your whole life. You just did not know it. He moved to stand directly in front of her. Pick me up. She blinked. You are injured. Pick me up anyway. Ilara hesitated only a moment before stepping forward and scooping him up with the same ease she had shown earlier. He was solid weight in her arms, but she held him steady without straining. Most women could not do this, he said calmly. Most men would struggle, but you barely notice the effort. Now imagine using that strength when someone attacks you. Imagine grabbing them and throwing them aside like they weigh nothing. Imagine their surprise, their fear. She set him down carefully, her mind racing with the implications. She had spent so long thinking of her strength as something shameful that she had never considered it as something useful, something powerful. The first rule of surviving a fight, Neshoba said, is understanding what advantages you have that your enemy does not expect. You have many advantages, Ilara. You simply need to stop apologizing for them. Outside, the sun was dropping toward the horizon. Vernon would be returning soon, and with him would come decisions that could not be unmade. But for the first time in her life, Ilara felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly. Something harder and more dangerous than hope. Recognition of her own capability. The sound of approaching horses reached them before sunset. Multiple riders, moving fast. Ilara moved to the window and counted 3 silhouettes against the darkening sky. Not Vernon's careful pace. Not the marshal's organized approach. These men rode with the urgency of hunters closing in on prey. They are here, she said quietly. Neshoba was already moving despite his injury, gathering the supplies she had prepared. The back door. We go now. But even as he spoke, 2 more riders appeared from the opposite direction, cutting off that route. 5 men total, spreading out to surround the house. They had planned this carefully, waited until the light was failing to make their move. Ilara felt her pulse quicken, but kept her voice steady. We are trapped, not trapped. Cornered. There is a difference. Neshoba moved to stand beside her at the window. Trapped means no options. Cornered means they think we have no options. They are wrong. The lead rider dismounted 20 feet from the front porch. He was tall and lean, with a face weathered by sun and violence. A knife hung from his belt, the blade long enough to have made the wound in Neshoba's side. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the open window. We know you are in there, Apache. And we know someone helped you. Send out the woman and maybe we will let her live. Ilara felt Neshoba tense beside her. She touched his arm, stopping him before he could respond. Then she did something that surprised them both. She opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The reaction was immediate. All 5 men stopped moving, staring up at her with expressions that shifted rapidly from expectation to confusion to something that might have been concern. She stood at her full height, shoulders back the way Neshoba had taught her, and let them see exactly what they were dealing with. The tall man recovered first. Where is the Apache? Inside. Ilara's voice was calm, wounded and weak. He will not give you any trouble. Then why are you standing in our way? Because I stitched that wound, and I do not like seeing my work undone. One of the other men laughed, a harsh sound. Your work? Lady, we did not ride all this way to argue with the help. Step aside, or we will move you aside. Ilara descended the porch steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. As she reached ground level, the full difference in their heights became obvious. She was taller than the leader by several inches, taller than all of them. The laughter died away. "You can try," she said quietly. The leader's hand moved toward his knife. Ilara moved faster than he expected, her long reach and natural strength giving her an advantage he had not calculated. She caught his wrist mid-draw and twisted, applying the same force she used to wrestle fence posts into position. The knife fell from his grip with a metallic clatter. The other men rushed forward. Ilara pivoted, using the leader's body as a shield, and shoved him backward into the closest attacker. They went down in a tangle of limbs. A third man grabbed her arm. She turned into the grip instead of away from it, surprising him, and drove her shoulder into his chest hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. What advantages you have that your enemy does not expect. The remaining two men hesitated, suddenly unsure. They had expected an easy target, a frightened woman who would collapse under pressure. Instead, they faced someone who moved with confidence and strength they had not prepared to counter. Behind her, the door opened again. Neshoba stood in the doorway, one of Vernon's hunting rifles in his hands. His face was pale with pain, but his aim was steady. "Leave now," he said, "while you still can." The 5 men exchanged glances, calculating odds that no longer favored them. But the leader pushed himself to his feet, cradling his twisted wrist, his expression dark with humiliation and rage. "We will be back, with more men, and when we return, you will both pay for this." Before Ilara could respond, new hoofbeats thundered from the southern road. Vernon, returning with Marshal Hendricks earlier than expected. The 5 men heard it too, their faces shifting from rage to calculation. Being caught attacking a woman's property by the law would end very differently than a quiet revenge in the dark. They mounted quickly and rode north, but this time their departure felt different. Not a retreat, a postponement. Vernon dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his face flushed with anger and something that looked dangerously close to fear. Behind him, Marshal Hendricks took his time, studying the scene with the careful attention of a man accustomed to reading situations before acting. His gaze moved from Ilara to Neshoba in the doorway, to the dust still hanging in the air from the departed riders. "What happened here?" The marshal's voice was neutral, professional. "I helped someone who was hurt," Ilara said before Vernon could speak. 5 men came looking for him. They threatened violence. I convinced them to leave. Vernon made a sound of disbelief. "Convinced them? Marshal, she attacked them. I saw the tracks, multiple horses, signs of a struggle. She harbored a fugitive and then assaulted citizens trying to enforce justice." "Justice?" Ilara turned the full weight of her attention on Vernon. "Those men murdered his brother and stole from their hunting camp. They came here to finish killing him. That is not justice. That is revenge." Marshal Hendricks dismounted slowly, his hand resting casually near his pistol. Not threatening, but present. "The Apache. He has a name?" "Neshoba," Ilara said. Neshoba himself remained silent, watching the exchange with dark eyes that missed nothing. "And those men who were here. You know their names?" Vernon shifted uncomfortably. "They were not from town. Probably drifters passing through. So we have 5 unnamed men with no proof of their accusations, against 1 injured man and a woman defending her property." The marshal's tone remained even. "Seems to me the situation is not as clear as you made it sound, Vernon." "She should have turned him in," Vernon insisted. "The moment she found him, she should have sent for you. Instead, she treated him like a guest, fed him, protected him, made herself complicit in whatever crimes he may have committed." "What crimes?" Ilara's voice rose for the first time. "Being Apache? Being injured? Having the misfortune to survive when men tried to murder him? You do not understand how things work out here." Vernon's face had gone red. "There are rules, boundaries, lines you do not cross if you want to survive. Helping one of them means choosing sides, and that is a choice with consequences. Then I choose consequences." The words came out clear and final. "Because the alternative is becoming someone I cannot live with." Silence settled over the scene. Marshal Hendricks studied her for a long moment, then glanced at Neshoba. "Can you ride?" Neshoba nodded once, his hand still pressed against his wounded side. "Then I suggest you do that. Soon. Before those drifters decide to come back with friends." The marshal turned to Vernon. "And you brought me out here on a false report. Made it sound like an emergency when what you really wanted was someone to handle a problem you were too afraid to handle yourself. Vernon's mouth opened and closed without sound. This is still my property, he managed finally. I want both of them gone by morning. That will not be a problem, Alara said. I was already planning to leave. The marshal nodded, satisfied. Then we have no issue here. Vernon, you ride back with me. Let them gather their things in peace. He mounted his horse with the ease of long practice, then paused to look down at Alara. You defended yourself and someone under your protection. That is not a crime in my jurisdiction. But those men will talk. Word will spread. You should head somewhere that word travels slower. I understand. After they left, Alara stood motionless in the yard, processing what had just happened. She had defied Vernon, challenged the established order, chosen to help someone society said she should have turned away. And in doing so, she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Behind her, Neshoba spoke quietly. You gave up everything to help me. Your home, your safety, your place in this world. She turned to face him, and something fierce burned in her chest. I gave up nothing that mattered. This was never my home. Safety is an illusion when you are too afraid to stand straight, and my place in this world was never here to begin with. Then where? I do not know yet. She met his eyes without flinching. But I think that is the point. For the first time in my life, I get to find out. The sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow they would leave. Tonight, they would prepare. And somewhere in the distance, a new life waited to be claimed by someone finally ready to reach for it. Morning came cold and clear. Alara had spent most of the night preparing supplies, checking saddles, and avoiding the thoughts that threatened to overwhelm her when she allowed them space. Now she stood in the yard, 2 horses ready, bags packed with everything she owned that mattered, which turned out to be remarkably little. Neshoba emerged from the house moving more easily than he had the day before. The stitches were holding, and his color had improved. He would be able to travel, though not comfortably. He crossed to where she stood and stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the morning chill. You are afraid, he said. It was not a question. Yes, there was no point in lying. I have never been anywhere but here. I do not know how to be someone other than who I have been. You have already become someone different. You simply have not noticed yet. He reached up slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. When she did not move, he touched her face with surprising gentleness. His hand was rough with calluses, but his touch was careful. Yesterday you stood against 5 men. You chose freedom over safety. You stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. That is not the same person who hid here for 2 years. Alara felt something crack open inside her chest. Something that had been locked away so long she had forgotten it existed. She leaned into his touch without thinking, starving for kindness that did not come with conditions or shame. Among my people, Neshoba continued quietly, strength is not something to hide. It is honored, celebrated. A woman who can hunt and fight and survive alone is valued above gold. You would not be unwanted there. You would be remarkable. I do not need to be remarkable, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just need to stop feeling like an apology. Then stop. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to look down to meet his eyes, close enough that she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, the slight crookedness of his nose from an old break, close enough to feel his breath against her collarbone. You are not too tall. You are not too strong. You are not too much of anything. You are exactly enough. And anyone who made you believe otherwise was afraid of what you represent. What do I represent? Proof that their rules are meaningless. That strength comes in forms they did not anticipate. That women do not need to be small and quiet and grateful to have value. His hand moved from her face to her shoulder, solid and steady. You terrify them because you exist outside their understanding of how the world should work. And that is their failure, not yours. Alara could not speak past the tightness in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with certainty instead of pity, with admiration instead of tolerance. She reached up and covered his hand with her own, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady rhythm of his pulse where her fingers rested against his wrist. Behind them she heard the sound of a door opening. Vernon stood on the porch, watching them with an expression she could not quite read. Not anger anymore. Something sadder. Something like regret for an opportunity lost, or a truth recognized too late. He stayed there for a moment, witness to the connection forming between two people his world had deemed incompatible, then turned and went back inside without speaking. Neshoba's gaze had not left her face. The choice is still yours. You can stay. Make peace with Vernon. Return to the life you knew. No one would fault you for choosing safety. I would fault myself. She said it with absolute conviction. I spent 26 years learning to make myself smaller. I will not spend the rest of my life doing the same. Something shifted in his expression. Pride, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. He stepped back slowly, releasing her but holding her gaze. Then we ride together, as equals, not as the unwanted woman and the Apache warrior, but as two people who refuse to accept the limits others tried to place on them. Where will we go? North, to the high country where my people make winter camp. The journey will take several days. It will not be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. Alara mounted her horse with practiced ease, settling into the saddle as if she had been born to it. From this height, the world looked different, larger, full of possibility instead of limitation. Neshoba mounted more carefully, favoring his injured side, but once in the saddle his posture straightened with the confidence of a man on familiar ground. He looked at her across the space between their horses, and for just a moment the rest of the world fell away. Ready? He asked. Alara looked back at the house one final time, at the place that had sheltered her and imprisoned her in equal measure, at Vernon's silhouette visible through the window, already turning away, at the fence post she had set, the work she had done, the years she had spent trying to earn acceptance from people who would never give it. Then she turned her horse north and did not look back again. They reached the Apache winter camp on the 4th day of travel. The journey had been hard, pushing through rough terrain with Neshoba still recovering from his wound. They had traveled cautiously, watching for signs of pursuit, but the 5 men had not followed. Either they were gathering reinforcements as promised, or they had decided the effort was not worth the risk. Alara hoped for the latter, but prepared for the former. She saw the smoke from cooking fires first, then the shelters arranged in a wide circle near a stream that cut through the valley. As they descended the rocky trail, figures emerged from between the structures, alerted by the sound of approaching horses. Within moments, a small crowd had gathered, watching with open curiosity as Neshoba and his unusual companion rode into camp. An older woman stepped forward first. Her hair was streaked with gray, and her face carried the lines of someone who had lived through hardship and survived it. She looked at Neshoba with obvious relief, then turned her attention to Alara. Her gaze traveled upward, taking in the full height of the woman who sat straight and tall in her saddle, no longer trying to make herself smaller. The woman spoke in her own language, rapid and questioning. Neshoba responded, gesturing toward Alara as he explained. The conversation continued for several minutes while Alara sat motionless, aware of the eyes studying her from every direction. Children had crept closer, staring with unguarded fascination. Men stood with arms crossed, expressions neutral but watchful. Women whispered to each other behind raised hands. Then the older woman approached Alara's horse and reached up. Alara took her offered hand and dismounted, suddenly face to face with someone who barely reached her shoulder. The woman circled her once, just as Neshoba had done days earlier, but where his assessment had been tactical, hers was measuring something different. She spoke again, and this time Neshoba translated. "She is my mother. She asks if you are the one who saved my life." Alara nodded. "I did what anyone should have done." "He was hurt," Neshoba translated, and his mother responded with a longer statement. His expression softened as he relayed her words. "She says you are clearly strong enough to have carried me, and brave enough to have defended me against those who meant harm. She sees these things with her own eyes. She says such qualities are valuable in any community, and you are welcome here if you choose to stay." Something broke loose inside Alara's chest. She had prepared herself for rejection, for more stares and whispers and careful distance. She had not prepared for acceptance based solely on what she had done and what she was capable of doing. Neshoba's mother gestured toward the camp, issuing instructions that sent people scattering to prepare. Then she turned back to Alara and smiled, a warm expression that transformed her weathered face. She took Alara's hand and led her toward the center of camp, speaking continuously in a language Alara did not yet understand, but somehow felt she could learn. Over the following hours, Alara was introduced to the rhythm of life in the winter camp, women who worked alongside men without shame, Children who ran and played and shouted without being told to quiet down. Elders who offered wisdom instead of judgment. And everywhere, people who looked at her height and strength with practical appreciation rather than discomfort. They saw what she could do, not what she failed to be. When the evening meal was prepared, Neshoba's mother placed Alara beside her son at the fire. The message was clear to everyone watching. This woman was under their protection. She belonged here because she had earned it through her actions. As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, Neshoba leaned close enough that his shoulder touched hers. Still afraid? Alara watched the faces around the fire, illuminated by dancing flames, faces that looked at her without expecting her to apologize for existing. "No," she said quietly. "Not anymore." "Good." His hand found hers in the darkness between them, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Because tomorrow, my mother wants you to help move the winter supplies. She says it usually takes 4 men. She thinks you can do it faster." Alara laughed, a sound she had not made in so long it felt foreign in her throat. She might be right. She usually is. Neshoba squeezed her hand gently. "Welcome home, Alara." She looked down at their joined hands, at the community that had accepted her based on merit rather than appearance, at the man who had recognized her capability when everyone else saw only difference. And for the first time in her 26 years, Alara Volkmann understood what it meant to be valued for exactly who she was. The unwanted woman had finally found her place, not by making herself smaller, but by standing tall. If you want to see another powerful story from the Wild West, click on the video on your screen right now. These tales of courage and transformation will keep you coming back for more. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that might change how you see the world. Click that video now.